Well, I think all origin stories are suspect. There are many different origins to things, but I think my mother was a very visual person. She loved to do photography and was really interested in painting. So sort of looking at framed images on the wall was something that was happening very early in my life. And the other, I think, very important thing was that in my childhood, I really felt this dissonance between what I was being told and what I was seeing. And so that was something that I was trying to resolve, and sort of the meaning that you can find in seeing things was early interest for me, I would say. When I decided that I wanted to try to go to the film school in France, I got the great counsel that I shouldn't try for the directing department, that I had virtually no chance of getting in as an American because no Americans had gone to the film school there before, and that I should try through a technical department. So I, like many people, thought, oh, I want to be a director, but let me try to get in through the camera department. Certainly within film schools, there's a lot of encouragement for women to be in any of the roles, and certainly at that time, half the class was women and half the class was men. But I did think of it as a secondary thing until I touched the camera. And then I was like, oh my goodness, I get to hold this. I get to be responsible for this. This is the center of the action. So I loved it from the beginning. Honestly, every context is always different, and it depends if you are familiar with the place and the people, whether you know the language or not, whether you know what are you searching for. So a director may have very clear ideas about what's there and what are you searching for and what's your sort of mission and the way you're thinking about framing it. And other times you have no directive at all and you're just trying to discover whatever seems to be meaningful. But I always go with the idea that I must create footage that can be used. So I must, sort of the idea of like getting coverage. I do think of that. But in some ways I think of that as like something to get out of the way, like to get that done. But what I'm really looking for is sort of the most mysterious thing happening in the room. And whether or not it is really the story that I am supposed to be following, if I can find the thing that's most compelling, I will film that. So I go off book a fair bit. Well, I love, of course, being told, go and do your thing, I trust you, if I understand what the film is we're trying to make, and if I have the capacity to be the one making those choices. But sometimes the relationships are being negotiated at every moment, and sort of the question of, is it okay to keep filming or not, is something that the director needs to manage, or sometimes I can be the person who is checking to see if it's okay if we keep filming. But I really appreciate directors who spend a lot of time talking with me about what they hope the film will be, what their influences have been, what they're thinking about the contradictions that they see in people and in the story. Because I think there's always contradictions. And so I love a director who is aware of those, and I can be looking for things that are happening sort of simultaneously within a person who's very public, but then there's something private going on. Those kinds of mashups are really interesting when you're filming, to look for clues to the unknown things. Well, I think a director is an incredibly difficult position. I think they're trying to manage too many things with too little time, with too little money, and they have to manage in real time what's happening with the people that we're filming, but they also have their hopes of what the film will be. So I do think of my role as a primarily supportive role, and as a role in which I seek to understand the director's vision and find a way to express that through the camera work. And sometimes the conditions make that really challenging. Sometimes you're not there long enough, or you're only allowed to film this one person, but they're in a crowd of people. And I'm always sort of wrestling with the part of myself that's beating myself up for what I missed, or why wasn't I in that position, and trying to relax into the knowledge that as a documentary camera person, you will miss things, because how can you know what's going to happen? But I try to say to myself, I must be as present as possible and try to be thinking of all the things that matter to the director as I am watching all the things that are happening. So I'm trying to manage those things in my head, and I do think that sort of multitasking that a camera person must do. Like right now, you're thinking about, are the levels good? Is she still in focus? She's moving her hands a lot. I want to shift. Ooh, her eye line's off. Oh, that part of her hair is sticking up. Like you're thinking about all of those things as you're trying to listen to me. And so that if my hair is sticking up or looks terrible, you'll wait until I finish speaking to say, hey, can you just put that hair behind your ear? But you're trying to gauge, is it important enough? Does it really matter that her hair is there? She's saying something interesting. Or, in fact, the director needs me to stop her talking. She's talking too long, so I can interrupt right now. I certainly think of filming as a relational action. So, like, I see you, I know you're there, I feel your support of me, I feel you paying attention. And so I feel more confident to continue. So I think that the presence of the camera person, whatever it is, sort of whatever energy is being given off, the person is picking up on. So that, if you're behind the camera and you're checking your phone, it distracts me. And obviously, like, the image could be perfect, but what you've done is altered the energy of the interaction. But because you're here paying attention to me, I can pay attention to you and say, like, he's there for me. We're doing this together. So that sort of like we're all in it together intensity, I think the camera person contributes to that. And so that in a situation like that, if you need to move and people are moving, can you move in ways that don't prevent them from moving? Can you move in ways that indicate to them you understand the complexity of what they're doing? And so you're signaling to them, I get you by the way that you move or the way that you are. And that mutual reinforcement then means they might take a bigger risk, or they might say something more profound than they would have if they were distracted, or if they thought, like, oh, she doesn't really understand what it is to dance, she's getting in my way. But it's instead like, whoa, she's moving at exactly the perfect moment when I'm going to do this. Well, then I'm really going to do this well. So a camera person can sort of enhance the energy of the situation, because the person who's being filmed knows this matters to me. I have a stake in sounding good and looking good because it's going out into the world. But if I know you have a stake in it too, then I can relax a little bit and talk more freely. So I love that, knowing that I matter. My presence as a person matters, as well as the way in which I manage the camera. Because one is not responsible for the whole of the final film, when one is a technician of some sort, you're relieved of a great deal of the anxiety, of the worry, of the responsibility. And so in some ways, I think you have a much greater creative freedom, because you can stretch in ways that the difficulty, the pressure that the director is under doesn't allow you the space for that. So that, you can get really into exploring something about the way my hand, fits into the frame of the set behind. You're like, oh, I'm going to go wider on that. Whereas the interviewer is just thinking, okay, she's talking too long. How do I get her to be more quick and get to the point? But, you can focus on, oh, I actually want to zoom in on her and get the hands, because then she could cut with the hands because she's talking too long. So she needs that cutaway. So your brain is thinking about those kind of things that are different from what the director needs to think about. And I also think that the role of the camera person is to be sort of intensely in the present, where the director must think about the future in different ways than the camera person does. So we sort of have a different relationship to time, I think. In the case of camera person, I shot very little material for the film, so there were very few times when I was actually making camera person. I was making camera person when I went back to Bosnia. I was making camera person when I filmed with my father and my children. But otherwise, all the footage had been shot in the service of other films. So it's a very peculiar example. It's sort of sui generis in so many ways. But I always think of myself as a maker of films, and that many films are being made simultaneously, and some of them are being directed by me, and some of them are being shot by me, and some of them I'm just in a feedback session with someone who's making a film, and I'm adding my voice to trying to figure out how to make this film work better. But so I think I'm in a community of people making films, is the way I think about myself. It really is a true community of people who are actively interested in all kinds of ideas and who are actively sharing with each other our love of the form and also trying to push each other in the ways that we meet challenges around representation. All of those things are really actively going on with this set of people because we're all encountering similar sorts of problems, which are very real problems to grapple with. Yeah, well, I think the demands of the fiction world, what the fiction world demands is that you sort of invent yourself as a person who has ideas. So that can lead to sort of excessive narcissism or excessive self-promotion in that quest to be recognized as a person who has ideas worth investing in. Whereas we as documentarians, we don't have to say that we're going to invent a world. We're saying, look, I found this part of the world that I want to film. Isn't this amazing? And whoever's trying to support the film or put financing into the film, they can see that that part of the world exists. Whereas the fiction director has to convince everyone that they as a person are capable of inventing that world, which is a really different thing. And it is really like sort of like leap of faith. You're creating some house of cards that who knows at what moment it can collapse. So that I think the sort of overinflated sense of self has to be built in some ways to convince other people to believe in you, whereas documentarians, that level of ego is not necessary to get the financing for the films. I think that's probably not true everywhere in the world in the same way, because I think there are certain countries where there's state support for any kind of film, and so that there's a more open process about who has access to getting funding. But certainly in the United States, I think there's a real cleavage between those two things. And I don't mean to throw all fiction filmmakers under the bus. There are a lot of fiction filmmakers who are incredibly egoless and don't have to be self-promotional in any kind of way. But there's a humility in the documentary community that's really interesting, because I think we're sort of constantly humbled by our work every day. So I'm making a film with my father, and it's a film about death and sort of the ways in which we can almost mock death or stand up to death or laugh at death, because at the moment when it really happens, we can't do that anymore. And so my father is 84, and he has agreed to make with me this film that's almost like the Groundhog Day of dying. They're going to be documentary scenes, and suddenly in the middle of the scene, he will accidentally die or be killed, but we will film that moment with a stunt person, and we will film it in a fictional way. So, he'll be with someone walking down the street and suddenly get hit by a bus. Or an avalanche will fall, he'll flip a car, fall down the stairs. These kinds of things that could happen, but they have to hit that space, which is the documentary space, and then move either into the absurd or the realist. And that, trying to figure out how that cinema language works, sort of that one side there's life, the other side there's death, one side there's documentary, the other side there's fiction. That tension is really interesting to me. He's already having a blast, and I hope he lives forever, which is sort of what I'm trying to do with the film. I mean, it's one of the things I discovered in Cameraperson is that my mother came back to life in Cameraperson. And the beautiful Bosnian grandmother, who's now dead, she lives in the movie. And when I showed it to her family, she had just died, and they had no photos of her. And so when they discovered the film, it was as if they were seeing her alive again. And to see them see that really reminded me of what cinema does. And Buster Keaton is alive for all of us. And so I want my dad in that territory. Filming interviews is just such a dynamic process. It's very live, and in some ways, to give yourself not the chance to move all the time, but to say to yourself, my primary role is to listen. But as I'm listening, I'm thinking about, what is this sentence she's just said? How could it be used with another sentence? Do I need to go in tighter? Do I need to go wider? What kind of energy do I bring to it? All those things are going, you're a really active filmmaker when you're filming an interview, which is strange to think because it feels like I set it up, it's static, it's fine. But in fact, the person moves, things happen, and emotions happen, and whether you choose to move or not move, all those things actually really matter in the film. So I think realizing your importance in this moment, that's that's challenging for a camera person when you think, I can't do anything, I can't move, but in some ways your presence really matters. Some places that you film, you are obviously an outsider. No one has ever seen anyone like you, and you realize you're a phenomenon. You're attracting attention with your camera, and I think you don't ignore that. Sort of interact with that, like let people see, here you are, you're not Ghanaian. That's gonna be obvious, but you might be a person who can really be funny, and everyone else there is funny, and then you're laughing and you're doing a thing together, and then you say, okay, everybody stare into the camera, and then, all right, everybody stop looking at the camera. How am I supposed to make my movie? Like, you can sort of get into these, to acknowledge your outsiderness it's sort of the elephant in the room, your outsiderness. So acknowledging it, not in a way that makes people feel uncomfortable or strange about seeing it, but that gives people sort of joy and humor in seeing it. I think that for me has been the thing that opens up all kinds of doors. Own it, but not in a way that is obviously arrogant or abusive, but own it in a way that is acknowledging of the difference between you and them and thinking about ways that it can matter.